A man-in-the-middle attack is where an end client believes they're talking to an authenticated server, an authorized server, but essentially there's an individual sitting in between that communication stream who's compromised that connection and is collecting all of the data that that client is talking to the server on. Often it's over a public Wi-Fi, probably the most common type of breaches. And then when you're in there, you're collecting cardholder data. If you're buying things online, you're collecting banking information, logon credentials. All of that information is being sent in the middle unencrypted.
There was a story back in February that a researcher had found that when he was looking at a lot of popular apps, in particular banking apps, he was finding that they were subject to man-in-the-middle attacks based upon their certificate not being properly validated. You'll have a client certificate, you have a server certificate, they match them up, they share a key, and then they make sure that that session's encrypted. And you know, in best case scenarios, nobody can access that data, or if they can, they just see scrambled up garbage. If you don't do the proper handshake and proper negotiation of those keys, it is certainly very possible that somebody could intercept it, be that man in the middle, somebody right in the middle that can connect the dots. And one of the key solutions to solving this is certificate pinning. And it's not a term that a lot of people know, especially not people in the network world know. It's more of an application thing. But basically what that means is that I'm going to hard code in my application, here is the server certificate, in particular the root certificate, that I'm connecting to. And so that when I connect to that site, I'm going to get back that certificate. I can validate it against the one that's stored in my application and have a high certainty that I'm actually talking to that person.
So certificate pinning, as John pointed out, is a good solution, especially in terms of building new applications.
Rather than passing something up to the server and getting a certificate back and validating that, the certificate is pinned inside of the application, and then the server has the validation of that certificate. So there's no exchange of information, there's just exchange of validation, which reduces the likelihood of the attack.
I think as a coding best practice, this is probably going to be one of the things that coders should look at, especially when they're transiting sensitive information such as payment information. We're seeing a number of our healthcare customers, for example, use these custom applications that they build that talks to different portals. And you want to make sure that somebody else is not intercepting this type of traffic, and this would be a good best practice.
Quick question, John. So you mentioned it earlier. You said they hard code the certificate into the application. How does that work for certificate management down the road if you need to change that certificate?
It does make certificate management tricky. So if you upgrade or change that certificate expires, you'll have to push out a new version of the application.
Yeah, this has to really tie into change management as well, because with the types of apps that we seem to be developing on the spur now, all this needs to connect, because tomorrow one application that has an expired certificate could be the cause for a vulnerability later.
Yeah, interesting. I remember when we first, back in the days, right, if you get the Wayback Machine with Mr. Peabody, we were running these apps, they were trusting the client way too much, right? So you could manipulate the client-side credentials, pass them up, and everything was great. You were in the account. Now we're not trusting the client enough, so it sounds like it's time to kind of, hey, let's bring those two together and make sure we've got a agreed upon relationship out of the gate, and then when we go to talk to each other again, we can do that securely.
And best practices say that if you're doing something very private and very personal, and banking kind of falls into that, you want to be very cautious on doing that in a public Wi-Fi environment.
Sure.
There is the potential that if you're not really monitoring what you're doing, that somebody could be accessing your data.
Yeah, and just a spin-off from that, we talk about man-in-the-middle attacks, right? So using a public Wi-Fi, everybody says, hey, you got to use a VPN, but you look at all the VPN providers that are out there, you start to wonder, how many of them are legitimate? How many of those are actually, capturing my traffic and passing it on? I mean, I guess you got to verify, right?
Yeah, well, and it always worries me when I see one of those VPNs get an update, like the app gets updated because there's a problem or a bug fix. It's like, oh, that makes me nervous.
Right, exactly.